And I liked the systems. I liked that there was a right way to do everything. You know, they taught you how to tie your shoelaces, how to brush your teeth, how to do everything from scratch as if you're a brand new human straight out of the box. Yeah. And that kind of appealed to me in those days. And so I managed to get through that period pretty well. I think when I went through, it was 45 days recruit training was. And yeah, so I came out of that knowing that I'd made the right call on that career choice.
What was it like calling back home after that basic training?
Well, yeah, I think we got maybe because you've got to remember this is I think I had a mobile phone, but it was very basic.
3210,
something like that.
Burns your ear off.
Yeah. And of course we didn't actually even have access to those while we were in recruit training. So maybe we didn't call home the first few weeks, and then maybe every Sunday you would get to call home. And my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, I'd call her, I'd call mum and dad and just sort of update them. And then my girlfriend came over for the march out parade. But the time between recruit training and then going to the next phase of training, which was the infantry training, was only brief. And then we were bussed up to Singleton in New South Wales for the School of Infantry there to start infantry training, which was another 10-week course. And that started to get a bit more challenging then, certainly physically, a lot more demanding, a lot of time with weight on your back, walking, a lot of just grinding physical activities and just carrying a lot of weight and just getting through it. But again, that was another, really sort of strong experience. And
what was it about infantry? Because I've always figured if I was to join the military, like I want to be the tank driver, or like I want to be in the Air Force or something like. When I watch Band of Brothers, that first wave, that looks like the scariest bit.
Yeah. I think that was just from what I had, the reasons that drew me to the military. It was all around sort of being the guy on the ground doing the fighting. I think that's the bit that appealed to me the most. So, I had reasonable aptitude scores and things. There were probably a bunch of things I could have done, but I was pretty adamant that I was sticking with infantry initially. And that was the path I wanted to go down. I was drawn to those really basic soldier skills that won or lost battles and that was just the part that appealed to me. And it was kind of recognized as being the hardest, I guess. So there was an element of that as well.
You're going to do it. You want to do the hard way. Yeah, that's awesome. And so what happened after that? So you went into infantry. How long was the infantry training?
Yeah, that was 10 weeks. And towards the end of that, we got told what our first posting would be. So our first units coming out of infantry training. So we pretty much got split in half. My platoon, we half went to Townsville, half went to Darwin, and I was with the group going to Darwin. So there's an infantry battalion in Darwin at the time, 5-7 RAR, Royal Australian Regiment. So got sent there, went straight from a Singleton winter in July to a Darwin. Well, it's hot all the time in Darwin. So that was a pretty big shock, and I'd never been to Darwin, so didn't really know what to expect, but got up there and it was great. We had just straight into a working unit and it was, it was great times. I was there for, about 3 years in total, and within 3 months of getting there, 9/11 happened. So that kind of changed the whole military world, really.
It changed the whole world in general. But what was it like going, oh my goodness, I'm in the army and this is...
Well, to be honest, it was a bit of a strange one because I had just had my wisdom teeth out. So I had a few days off work.
So you thought it was the drugs.
Big swollen face. And so anyway, I was lying there one morning, I think, and my girlfriend, who was still in Perth, she called me up and said, turn the TV on. And in my groggy state, I sort of did and sort of saw what was happening. And in terms of its effect on us, immediately all the military bases went into an upgraded security mode, and it was sort of very restrictive there for a while. Darwin, we also had a lot of US forces there at the time. So I remember hearing stories about what happened, in the nightclubs and everything when the initial alarm was raised and the lights came on and everyone was, running around. It was a bit of chaos. And then, we didn't know sort of what was going to happen in the immediate aftermath. And so it was certainly a time of heightened tension. But I guess the general feel in the military at the time was excitement, because we thought, well, there's going to be some stuff going on here, some action here. And at the same time, we had like East Timor was still going on after the initial operations in '99. That was still ongoing stuff, and we were actually our unit in Darwin. We were gearing up for a rotation in the not too distant future for Timor. So we had that coming up, and then the unknown of what was going to happen post 9/11. And not long after that, the US went into Afghanistan, and Australia committed some forces initially, and then there was a bit of a lull, and then later on, obviously, we spent a lot of time there.
Yeah. So when they gave you the call, so you never went on the rotation for Timor, I guess, and then
actually I did. I didn't do the full rotation because I'd already applied to do the Commando special forces selection. So I'd sort of set my sights on that, but managed to. I think I did a roughly 3 months of that rotation in Timor, which was a great experience. My first operational experience. So just being on operations has a different sort of feel to it, and it was really, a terrific experience.
Is it because Timor, is kind of jungle terrain and stuff, isn't it? Is it like being a film guy? I'm picturing Predator. What's it feel like hiding in a jungle? What, you can't see anything, nothing can see. Like, what the hell?
Yeah,
Tell us what it's about.
Jungle's a pretty extraordinary place to operate in. We did do some pre-deployment training up in Tully, up in far north Queensland, where they have the Army Jungle Training Centre, and that was my first exposure to it. And just so difficult to work in, and I still to this day have never experienced darkness like that. When the sun goes down in a thick canopy, there is no light at all. You cannot see your hand in front of your face, and that experience on its own was pretty mind blowing. But just still seeing what a lot of the jungle training is based on the lessons learned from Vietnam. So just thinking about applying what we were learning and things that we were being exposed to what the guys did in Vietnam, just sort of made that so much more real. Yeah. And I remember our first lesson on like booby traps, for example, and thinking, imagine, patrolling through areas of Vietnam, knowing that you were likely to come across these things. So it was full on. And then in Timor, it was a different environment. We weren't a different threat environment by that point, but we were still, to this day, some of the patrols I did in that deployment were as challenging physically as patrols did in any other theatre later on. Just because of the terrain, the weather, just how much equipment we were carrying. Some really, really difficult things, but great guys. I still look back very fondly on those guys that were. I was in their section and the platoon, and it was wonderful. And 3 months there, and then came back and started just gearing up then for the Commando selection and training after that.
Just to quickly with the jungle stuff. So what was when things are challenging, what's your intrinsic motivation? That lump of coal in your heart that you got to forge to like create the fire.
That's a good question. I think that's evolved over time for me. I think in those days, I was certainly still really trying to prove something to myself, prove that I almost wanted it to be really difficult, because then I would have a way to measure myself. That's not to say I always sort of was able to overcome those difficulties, but I really just thrived on the challenge of it. And I just felt very, very at home in that military environment. So I enjoyed all the aspects of it. Whereas, some people would get worn down by some of the, I guess, more mundane elements, but all those things were a big part of it. So I quite enjoyed all of that process, and I felt very much at home in the army. So it didn't really feel like I was doing anything that went against sort of my nature. So, and certainly elements of that still a part of me to this day. I still enjoy doing difficult things. I still enjoy the challenge of things. I guess I I've put less emphasis on the result, I guess. So I'm still trying to do my best and win, but I don't let setbacks affect me as much as they did when I was younger.
Sure.
Yeah.
And commando training. So that's one of the hardest things you could do, probably.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Any special forces selection course throughout the world generally is a challenge. This one was certainly no different. Yeah, it certainly pushes you to moments where you're questioning why you're doing it. And that was probably the first time during my military career where that happened. I'd been in less than 4 years, I think, when I went through that. And I did have moments on that where I thought, is this really what I want to do? Is this where I see myself? And that's the whole idea really of going through those things. And you just have to keep moving forward and keep going and not let, you can't dwell on things too much, because otherwise that's when you do end up in that mental spiral and you end up sort of talking yourself in or out of doing things. But the initial selection and course was about 4 weeks from memory in, largely based in Sydney, but then Singleton and a few other training areas, and culminated, or it had a few big activities during it that were sort of important waypoints for the people conducting the course, seeing how guys operate. And look, the course has evolved a lot. I'm sure it's very different today than what it was when I went through it. But the goal is the same, to sort of push people beyond their capabilities or what they think of their capabilities and see how they react. So it certainly achieved that.
They say that Australian Special Forces are some of the best in the world. And the only experience I really had with them is we did a training session at that Singleton barracks on the beach sand, pushing tractor tires up the dunes, and like 40 dudes started spewing because we just couldn't handle. The guy doing it, he says, like, we do this in our sleep like this. You're like, dude, how tough are you? Like, you don't want to be on the wrong side of an Australian Special Forces, really.
Yeah, look, and that reputation is very well deserved, and certainly, I am so grateful for the people that had the opportunity to meet and work with and deploy with eventually, and do all those things. And yeah, the greatest people you could hope to work with. And, not all super athletes by any stretch, not all, imposing people physically, although a lot are, but, but they all shared like the same sort of mentality and that whole concept of going beyond what what you think you're physically capable of, or just not quitting, I think is the number one thing. And that sort of epitomizes Australians in general, but particularly Australian soldiers and Special Forces soldiers.
And so how old were you when you got the call to go over to Afghanistan?
So yeah, I went through the selection course, and then we did like what we call the reinforcement cycle. So all the courses to get qualified in all the various skill sets. So that takes about another 9 or 10 months. And then you get posted or assigned to a commando company. And then so that occurred. And then not long after that, Australia sort of almost recommitted to Afghanistan. We had troops in there post 9/11 for a period. And then we didn't really have a presence there. And then around 2005, yeah, that sounds right, we recommitted initially a special operations task group comprising of guys from Special Air Service Regiment and the Commandos. So I went over as part of that first rotation, and that would have been middle of the year 2005 by the time we got there. And that was called SOT, Special Operations Task Group 1. And then they just kept rolling from there. So I think by the end, I don't know what number they got up to. By the end, maybe 20 or somewhere around there. So had just under 6 months there with that rotation. And then so I was in my mid-20s at that point.
What sort of activities did you have to do? Was there a sense when you landed, you go, okay, this is Afghanistan?
A little bit, because we were the first. It was there wasn't a lot of infrastructure set up for us. It was a lot of stuff was done on the fly. Even just getting there was a challenge. We flew from Sydney to Perth. We spent a bit of time in Perth just waiting to go, and then we flew. So my team, 5 of us, 5 or 6 of us, we flew out of Perth on I think a C-130 and flew to Guam in the middle of the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
And then we were on a C-17, which is an enormous transport